Let's first up go to Perth and catch up with Steven Schwartz, who's the Emeritus Professor of the Centre for Independent Studies. He joins us from Perth. Steven Schwartz has been the former Dean of Medicine at the University of Western Australia, a former Vice-Chancellor at 3 universities. Thanks for joining us, Steven. Good to talk to you. You've published a really pragmatic and practical take on how we've handled the pandemic so far and what we should be looking to now that we're getting the vaccine rolled out in this country. Are you optimistic?
Yes, I have to be optimistic. We all have to be optimistic, Chris. Things can only improve from here. But in Australia, our leaders have a pretty big hill to climb. Having put their efforts on 0 cases, it's difficult to see how to walk back from that. And one of the problems I foresee is that we're never going to get down to 0 cases, not even with herd immunity. And we've got evidence for that in measles. Australia officially eliminated measles in 2014, but we've had measles every year since because people go abroad and there are still measles in other countries. If they're not vaccinated for one reason or another, they can bring it back, and they do bring it back. The same thing could possibly happen with COVID for some years. If we're going to have a lockdown every time there's a single case, we could have lockdowns forever and ever.
This is something we've focused on a lot in this program over the last year. There has been an unofficial elimination strategy by most of the state leaders. When we were told at the outset the idea was to flatten the curve, not to overwhelm our medical system. So where are we going to be placed in 3 months, 6 months, a year's time when there are outbreaks of coronavirus in various states? Can we have faith in the premiers not to lock down, not to shut down their borders?
Well, I hope so. I think what they're hoping is that as more people become immune, and there are very few immune people in Australia because we have had relatively few cases, and we are quite slow in the rollout for the vaccine. So there's very few people with immunity. I guess they're hoping that when immunity begins to become more common and prevalent in the population, that a few cases won't matter because they won't have anyone to spread it to. But that could be a long way off. And until then, we could have a number of other lockdowns unless we can be a little bit more precise and a little more focused in our response.
Given the low levels of risk, the low levels of morbidity when it comes to healthy young adults, what's the utility of the vaccine for healthy young adults protecting? What margin of protection does it add to their relatively low risk as it is?
Well, normally what you hope to find is that people who are vaccinated also don't pass on the illness. And so one of the reasons for being vaccinated is not necessarily to protect the individual, although it will do so, but to protect individuals who can't be vaccinated for one reason or another. They're too young, or they're immunosuppressed, or there's some other reason why they can't be. So to get herd immunity, we have as many people as we possibly can vaccinated, even, as you say, among those who may not actually be in great risk from the illness.
Yeah, let's hope that's the case, but we've spoken to a number of epidemiologists on this program who have said there isn't the evidence there yet that it actually stops transmission, but let's hope that is the case. But in the interim, once we get all vulnerable Australians vaccinated, all the elderly, everybody in aged care settings, the people working with them, any other people with other existing illnesses, as you've just described, aren't we then in a position to be much more relaxed and much more less worried about the risks? Because if only healthy young people are getting coronavirus and the vulnerable are protected, the threat is diminished greatly, isn't it?
That's right, and we live with risks all the time. Society makes decisions about what risks it wishes to accept. And those it doesn't. I mean, one of the great examples is the road toll. Over 1,000 people die on our roads every year in Australia. We could easily reduce that by reducing the speed limit to, say, 10 kilometres an hour. We could crawl around the roads. I'm pretty sure nobody would die, but there would be a huge price to pay for it. And we've agreed, I guess, as a society, maybe not overtly, but tacitly, that we can accept those deaths so that we can drive faster. We do this all the time. It's a very common thing in society, and it should be common for COVID as well.
Yet our state leaders in particular have been incredibly jumpy. They haven't looked at the key word that you've mentioned today and in your article, and that is proportionality.
Well, yes, but I guess there are also political considerations involved, aren't they? That in Australia, at least, closing state borders is seen as a positive thing by many voters. One of the more interesting things was in 1919, when there was the so-called Spanish flu. The West Australian government at the time impounded the Transcontinental Railroad at Kalgoorlie and wouldn't let it go back east, so that it couldn't bring any more people into the States. So there's a long history of xenophobia and jingoism and things among the States.
Well, thanks for joining us, Stephen. I hope the vaccine brings a much more practical response in this country.
I hope so too.
Steven Schwartz there, who, as I said, is the former Dean of Medicine at the University of Western Australia.